Yes. Yes.
All
Yes.
right, welcome. This conference program is amazing. I've only been able to attend one other session so far with Mary Poppendieck and Tom Poppendieck. It was really, really good. So I'm honored to be part of it. I'm going to talk today about something a bit related to what some of the things Mary talked about, which is a holistic approach to testing in continuous delivery, because as she said, that's a very central part to continuous delivery. And this material, it takes a village. There's a lot of people that I work together with to develop this material. So I've co-authored some books with Janet Gregory and also developed a video course. And we also have a live course, Agile Testing for the Whole Team, which, just to point out, it is available in Spanish in Latin America and other places, other languages as well, but you can look at agiletestingfellow.com for information. And I work on a daily basis. I work as part of a cross-functional team developing a financial services product. And I live in Vermont on a farm with actually 4 donkeys, the only 3 here in the picture, and cats and dogs and my husband. So I've been enjoying the beautiful fall color here. And today I'd like to share some of my team's experiences learning how to build quality into the product with and succeed with delivering small changes that are valuable to our customers to production frequently so that we lower our risk and we can work at a sustainable pace. And if you have questions, feel free to ask in the chat or whatever, especially if there's something I say that you don't understand. Feel free to stop me and I'll try to explain better. Let's see. All right, I don't know why my slide doesn't want to advance. There we go. So a lot of us have been on journeys with our teams that didn't go so well, but I think we learn more from failure than from success. So failure is really about learning. I'm going to talk today about a team I was on for several years that by many definitions would be seen as a high performing team. Our developers were really great. We paired 100% of the time. We did test-driven development, continuous integration. We automated our tests at UI, API, and unit levels. We had good infrastructure in place and literally thousands of automated tests. And so back around, oh gosh, 2017 probably, we wanted to move our application to the cloud. So we did that. We had our deployment pipeline set up. We had a blue-green deploy so that we always had one live production environment and one idle production environment that were duplicates of each other, but we could deploy to one, test it out, and then flip the switch. So lots of safety precautions for deploying new changes to production. And our managers said, well, I think we're ready to deploy twice a week. Up to that point, we deployed every 2 weeks if we were lucky. So we were trying to move to twice a week deploys. So, we thought that this would not be too hard to do. So unfortunately, we ran into some problems. So one of the things was we did have lots and lots of automated tests, but we still had a checklist of manual regression checks that could not be automated for whatever reason. I don't know if any of you in the audience are testers or have had to deal with doing this sort of manual regression testing or checking. And when we started to deploy twice a week, we had to spend time doing this manual testing, which normally it only took about 30 minutes. And we never found problems with the things on the checklist, but as we checked them, we would find other problems. And so often the deploy would be delayed. We had to put in a fix and redo the whole thing. And this started to suck up all of our time as the 2 testers on a team for 30 developers. And so it became very hard to get 2 deploys out per week. And what had happened was that we testers no longer had time to do exploratory testing, the really important human-centric testing where we explored the code that we had changed and were ready to deploy to see if there were any issues with it, because regression tests don't catch new bugs. They can only make sure that you didn't break anything. So it didn't really go so well. So I'd like y'all to stop and think for a minute. Many teams, most teams I meet these days, if they're not already doing continuous delivery or continuous deployment, in other words, releasing small changes to production quite frequently, at least once a week. If they're not already there, they're trying to get there. But there's so many things that can get in your way. So stop and think for a minute. What's the biggest obstacle that's keeping your team from being successful with continuous delivery? Or if you have continuous delivery, what's causing issues with it? And also feel free to share anything in the chat if you like, so share with each other. It's hard with these virtual conferences because it's hard to get conversations going, but I encourage you to share if you like. Let's think for a minute. Okay, well, you can keep thinking about that. I will go ahead and move on. So my team was in this mess. We wanted to do twice a week deploys to production, and it wasn't going very well. So we got together and reflected on these problems, and we were really good at having retrospectives and identifying what's the biggest thing in our way, and what can we do to make that problem smaller. And what we decided was we just didn't have enough time for this exploratory testing that would find the unexpected problems, the things we didn't think about when we were writing our acceptance tests and automating our acceptance tests. And also, depending on 2 testers for 30 developers to try to do all the exploratory testing, that's just not going to scale. So the first thing we did was to just get rid of that manual regression checklist. Nobody wanted to do it, wasn't really adding any value. And honestly, even after we got rid of it, we never had problems that would have been found with that checklist. So that was funny. Oh, they have time to do automation. I see that in the chat. Yep. That is hard. Yeah. Platform dependencies. Yep. Those are some of the things we're running into too. So what we had to do, so we had time to automate the tests. That was built into our process. We had thousands of automated tests, but we were still having problems in production. So our development managers agreed that we needed to do more exploratory testing. And so what they decided to do was to make exploratory testing skills part of what the developers needed to know and become good at to move up their career ladder. And then they asked the testers, please teach everybody who's not a tester how to do exploratory testing. So we had a couple of workshops with everyone on the team that wasn't a tester, including product owners, designers, customer support people. We taught them how to write an exploratory test charter and how to use heuristics to test things like boundary conditions and format exploits and all kinds of things. And we started pairing with developers. So as a tester, I would pair with the developer, help them think of what unit tests to write, and help them do manual exploratory testing at the story level before deciding we were finished with that story. And once they learned the skills, the developers themselves could be responsible for that exploratory testing at the story level. And we also did exploratory testing at the feature or epic level. What we would do is we would pair with a product owner or a developer to write exploratory testing charters, which are time-boxed increments of discovering or exploring a particular aspect of a feature with particular resources and seeing what we can find. And then to do those charters, to do that exploratory testing at the epic or feature level, we again would pair with a product owner or pair with a developer, or two developers would pair with each other, or we would get an ensemble of several people together and do it together. So there were lots of different approaches that we could take. And this worked really, really well. So we started having fewer and fewer problems in production, and we started more consistently being able to do our twice a week deploy. Yeah, I hope that I hope I'm speaking clearly enough for the interpreter. Good. One thing I found in my career is when your team has a problem, the first thing to do to solve the problem is make that problem visible so that you can talk about it. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of ways that we can talk about fitting testing activities into continuous delivery using some visual models and frameworks. So I learned about visualizing deployment pipelines. So the path our code takes from when somebody commits a new change in the code or a configuration, and all the steps that have to happen for that code or change to get out into production. And visualizing it lets you have a conversation with your team about it. So this is an example of a visual that would help you start making improvements. And notice here that there are manual steps or human-centric steps that also have to be done. Maybe they're not automated yet, or maybe there's something that isn't automated. Even if your team doesn't have an automated continuous integration and deployment pipeline, you still have a pipeline. You're just doing those steps manually. So you still want to visualize what you're doing and then see where can you save time, where can you get quicker feedback, are there things you could automate? Can you use feature flags so that you can hide features behind your release feature toggle and go ahead and deploy the code to production, finish your user acceptance testing, your exploratory testing, security testing, whatever it is. And then when you're confident about it, then you turn it on in production by flipping that feature flag or toggle. So the closer to the left we are in this pipeline, the faster our feedback. So that's good. We like fast feedback so that we know our changes were good or we know we caused a problem. The ones as we go to the right, that's slower feedback, but it gives us more confidence that what we're deploying will not cause our customers pain. So you can lay this out with virtual sticky notes if you're not co-located, as many of us are working remotely. If you're together, you can just use cards on a table or on a wall, but you can talk about each stage in your pipeline. Is there some way you can speed it up? Can you make things parallel? What can you do to make your feedback faster and make that more reliable? Now, talking about this team where we were trying to do twice weekly deploys, I couldn't get them to do this together. I tell people a lot of things. This would be a good idea, and I can't always get my own team to do it. I did it myself. It helped me understand our pipeline, and then I had questions I could go and ask the team, and we could talk about it. And so we ended up making some improvements. The automated tests, some people were talking about automation. A lot of us have experienced flaky tests, especially with UI level tests, where a test fails in your continuous integration, you run the test again and it passes. Why is that? Sometimes that could be a timing issue or a dependency on something external. Sometimes it could really be a bug, and the bug is just hard to reproduce for whatever reason. So you can't just ignore these tests. And if you spend a lot of time having to analyze failures in your continuous integration, are your automated tests really helping you? So there are just a whole lot of ways that keep our automated test suites from making us more confident. But going back to my team, we had tons of automated tests, and we were catching problems with our exploratory testing, but we still were having regression failures getting in production. We didn't trust our tests. We had too many flaky tests, and we had a very complicated single-page JavaScript application that was prone to concurrency issues. It was just very complex. So one of the ways we can talk about our automated test suites is with Ashley Hunsberger's test suite canvas. And I know this is kind of probably small and a little harder to read, but it is downloadable from GitHub. So it's something you could download and use to talk about with your team. And so we talk about each of the automated test suite in our pipeline, or perhaps an automated test suite that we don't have yet. And so, what's the purpose of that suite? Who is it benefiting? What is the information produced, and who needs the information? How are we mitigating risks? How can we make that suite reliable? Who's going to respond when there's a test failure? That's very important. So I highly recommend, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just this is another example of a visual framework to help guide your conversations to improve your testing activities and your automated tests. So some of my favorite questions are, what information are we getting? Who's going to address test failures? Are we pairing on test automation? Because that could help. Or are we doing code reviews? Because our test automation code is just as important, or maybe more important in some cases, than our production code. We should aim to have the same quality. So we need to have code reviews or pairing or ensemble programming on it. And again, if I can't get my team to go through the test suite canvas, I go through it myself, and then I bring those questions to the team. Bring them to retrospectives, bring them to planning sessions. So I mentioned that my team had literally thousands of automated tests at all levels, and yet we were still having regression failures in production. So a new change was breaking functionality that customers were already using. It's not making our customers happy. So I started, the UI level tests were all automated by the developers who worked on the story. So they did all the automated tests at every level. And they were good developers. They did test-driven development. They refactored, they did good practices. But except when it came to the designing tests, they didn't really have those skills for the UI level tests. And when I looked at the tests, I noticed that a lot of tests had no assertions. I don't know what a test with no assertions could be testing. And so we really needed to have that collaboration. We needed to have testers to helping the developers specify and design the tests. And we needed to make sure that the most risky parts of our application were covered with automated regression tests. So what we did was we got a cross-functional group together from our team, developers, our product owner, managers, testers, customer support, and then a senior team member who understood our front-end architecture, which was pretty complicated, drew it on a whiteboard. This was back in the days when we could work together in person. And then we started discussing the risk. What were the most risky areas? And we marked them on this diagram, which things in red were the most risky areas. Then we could look at our automated test suites and see if we had coverage for those areas, and we could fill in the gaps. We also decided that we needed to improve our UI level tests. So we decided to adopt the page object model to make our tests more maintainable, easier to write, easier to maintain, and refactored the old tests to use that. And we gradually improved our feature coverage. So that was how we identified our risks. There are lots of techniques you can use to do that. And again, do something visual. And these are all possible to do virtually as well. We have all these lovely Miro and Mural and even Google Jamboards or Google Slides, all kinds of online tools that we can do this with. And one thing that these tools help us with when we work visually and when we can use virtual sticky notes and I'll write on a board or draw, it helps us think laterally. It helps us think outside the box and overcome our unconscious biases. So it's a great set of tools. So think about the risks for your team's product. Do you think you can identify all of your risks before you release? What if we have more of a load on our production system than we've anticipated, more users than we thought? What if somebody accidentally drops a table in the production database? What if somebody updates a configuration file incorrectly? Or what if we're using we have a retail website and our payment API suddenly starts returning errors? We can't, our test environments almost never really replicate our production environments. We cannot test everything in our test environments. And we can't even think of all the situations we might need to test because we don't know what will happen. We don't know what our customers will do. We may be depending on external third-party vendors or whatever. And we can set up monitoring and we can do our logging. We can set up our monitoring. We can set up our alerts. But if we don't expect something to happen, we may not write log data for that thing. We may not have something on our dashboard or an alert for that type of incident. What do you do when you have things you didn't anticipate to happen? So then we get into observability. I know this is a new term for a lot of people. It's only been talked about the last few years. And I have a good metaphor for it from Pierre Vincent. So imagine you're driving a fast car, but now suddenly some fog rolls in and limits your visibility. You have to slow down because you can't see. Now, airplanes would encounter the same sort of situation. They fly in the clouds. They have instrumentation that allows them to see. So they can, they're not seeing with their eyes, but they can see well enough to fly and they can keep going fast. And this is what observability does for us. We instrument our code, we add telemetry to our code and collect all the information that is available so that when something happens that we didn't expect, we can ask questions of our production system. We don't have to go back and add more logging and deploy again to get that information. That's the idea behind observability. These days, we have the capability to store huge amounts of information, and we have the tools that help us interpret that information really fast. So this is a new area, and I think it's a really important area that's related to testing because we testers are question askers and we're always looking for risks and analyzing risks. And this is something that observability helps us do. Now, going back to that team, this was, back in, like I say, 2017, so 4 years ago, and there were no observability tools yet, but we had tools like Mixpanel, which was an analytics tool. We had Splunk, New Relic, Datadog, and we realized that we needed to start looking at this data more. And at about this time, Charity Majors and Cindy Sidrahan started talking about observability, and it was kind of a light bulb moment for us. So we got much more interested in data from production to understand what was going on. And it also helps us focus our testing when we know what customers are doing and what they find the most valuable, focusing our testing there. So we test as much as we can in our test environment before we deploy, and maybe after we deploy, but before we release. we monitor for the predictable failures, and then for everything else, we at least keep a sampling of the data, and perhaps we capture all of our 500 errors, so that if anything happens in production, we have that information to look at. So I have really, my teams and I have really taken this whole team responsibility for quality for the last 20 years or so, since the extreme programming days. Cross-functional team, we have lots of different people with different experience, different skills, and that's what makes it work. So how does it work? I've been very interested. I mentioned unconscious bias already, and I have a theory that my set of unconscious biases is different from the next person. So maybe we all have different ones. So when we work together, we're more likely to see problems and think outside the box. We have data that shows that companies whose employees are more diverse, those companies are more successful, they make more money. And I think this applies to software teams. In Agile and DevOps, we have generalized specialists. Everybody, the idea is everybody can write some code, everybody can do some operation skills, but you still need specialists. No one person can know everything in depth. So the specialists can transfer their skills to other people on the team. And it's important to get your team together and say, what level of quality do we want? What level of quality can we commit to? Because it's going to be hard to achieve, and then it's going to take lots of baby steps to get there. So that commitment is really key. So, find out what our customers value. So going back to my team, the struggling to deploy twice a week, we tried an experiment with doing smaller teams or smaller pods within our large team. And so one, 2 or 3 developer pairs, so 2 to 6 people. And then as a tester, I was supporting 2 or 3 of these small teams, which was difficult because, I was multitasking, but I could help them do things like identify, we're going to work on a feature. Let's identify the most valuable product or learning release, the thin slice of that end-to-end feature that we can put into production, get feedback from our developers. So that was something that I could help people, teach people techniques how to do that. And so I could go to different teams and kind of act as a consultant. And so I was acting more as a test consultant than a tester, but passing on these different testing skills. So we experimented with these small teams to deliver features more quickly so that our continuous delivery would work better. And one of the things we did was apply, some of you may have heard of mob programming or ensemble programming, where you work in a group of people and you change out the driver navigator roles. And we applied that to our acceptance testing. So when a team had 4 or 5 stories ready from an epic for acceptance by the product owner, we would gather together the product owner, the tester, the developers who worked on it, a customer support person, and the designer. And we all get together and do the acceptance testing on that story. So one person would drive, the others would make suggestions of what to test or what to do. And when we had a question, the person who could answer that question was right there. So that could be a physical room or a virtual room. So, this icon, does that look like the right design, or is it in the right place on the screen? The designer is there to tell us. Is this error messaging correct? The product owner knows. Our customer is going to understand this. The customer support person can give us input. And we could go through 4 to 6 stories in 30 minutes and either accept them or reject them. It was really a great time saving and helped us do a great job at testing. So what makes all this possible? Working with people in different roles, different skill sets. We have to build relationships. So teams that are transitioning to Agile and to DevOps, they may be used to working more in a silo where we have a lot of handovers. So We have the analysts, and they hand over the requirements to the development team, and they hand the requirements over to the test team, and they hand the release candidate over to the operations team. But now our company's trying to have all these people work together. So there are a lot of good ways that we can build relationships. One thing I like to do is, invite somebody in operations, for example, can you come and tell us how you monitor things in production, or can you help us understand our deployment pipeline better? I mean, not that they might be in a separate team, or maybe they're on our team and we're just not very familiar with what they do, or offer to help them. So all these ways we can build relationships. And I've been doing this when I started new jobs. So, ask people to have a one-on-one session and a virtual coffee. And that's a really great way to build those bridges. It's really important. And then we can collaborate together. So talking about a quality culture, quality is really, you have to have the culture that supports it. Your executives have to understand that it's important. We may have to educate our management on why we should invest in quality, how it pays off. And so there are things like, we know now that psychological safety is a prerequisite to high performing teams, because we had to feel safe to experiment because we might fail. And we need to not fear that we'll be in trouble for failing. As testers, especially, we need to feel safe to ask questions, point out problems. We have lots of examples in industry, especially in unfortunate examples in the aerospace industry, where somebody knew about a problem but was afraid to mention it. Or maybe they mentioned it and didn't get heard. So we need visionary leaders to help us, to help guide us, to support people, and to get out of people's way so they can do their best work, which is to me, what agile development has always been about. And I've been lucky to be on those teams. A lot of teams, or a lot of companies, say, oh, we've transitioned to agile, we're going to be fast now. And unfortunately, when you focus on speed, you cut too many corners, you accumulate technical debt, and that slows you down. And also, when you transition to agile or DevOps, you have to learn a lot of new things. The team has to practice new techniques, and it takes time to learn them. So it may slow you down at first, but investing in that solid foundation of good practices like test-driven development, continuous integration, refactoring, all of those things together, in the end, you are going to be able to go faster because your code base is protected with automated regression tests. You're using good practices. You're doing small, low risk changes that you're putting frequently into production. So if there is a problem, easy to fix. And you learn the business domain so that you can help your internal customers, your business stakeholders, pare everything down, like get rid of anything extra or fluffy. Let's just focus on what's really valuable to the customer, so we don't waste time building things the customer didn't want. That kind of makes you look a lot faster, but really you're just eliminating work that doesn't need to be done. So these principles of continuous delivery from Jez Humble and David Farley, I highly recommend this book. Mary Poppendieck talked about it as well. I like to use these principles to guide our work, and they help you mitigate risks and put more joy into your work. We should enjoy what we're doing. So this is just a one small step at a time, using our retrospectives, identifying the biggest thing in our way. Let's try an experiment to make that biggest problem less bad, and let's measure our progress and say, oh, and we think that by refactoring our automated tests, that will reduce our regression failures by 50%, whatever it is. Measure it, and if your experiment doesn't work, try something else. So what I recommend doing is get your team together, talk about quality. What does it really mean to you? Back my first team where I did this back in 2003, we said, what kind of quality do we want? And we said, we want code. We want to write code that's so good, we'll take it home and show it to our moms and put it on the refrigerator because we're so proud of it. And how will we get there? Well, we've heard that test-driven development helps you write really good code. We've heard that continuous integration is really important for quality. So we just started learning those practices. We took time. We had management support to take the time to learn them. And in the end, we were highly successful, high performing. And that team actually did get to continuous delivery pretty successfully. So these are some resources, and I can make these slides available to the conference organizers, and feel free to reach out to me anytime. Best way is probably on Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn, and my email is lisa@lisacrisman.com. So that's pretty easy, but feel free to reach out to me, ask any questions, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. This was a great presentation. I see that we enjoyed it very much. I wanted to ask the participants, me gustaría pedirle a los participantes que si tienen alguna pregunta para hacer, pueden escribirla en el chat. En cualquier idioma la podemos traducir, bueno, cualquiera no, en castellano o en inglés. Si les interesa hacer alguna pregunta en vivo, pueden levantar la mano y les habilitamos el micrófono también. They're thanking Lisa. I can see their faces.
Oh, here we go. How to write stories focused on good quality and small changes with great values. Ooh, that's a really, really good question. One of the things that the current team I'm on has done recently is instead of estimating stories and saying this is 1 point, this is 3 points, this is 5 points, we've decided to try to make our stories small and consistently sized. And so every story we hope would be just 1 or 2 days worth of work, including all the testing. And so our product owner agreed to try this. So we're using techniques like mind mapping and example mapping, which is a technique from Matt Wynn, where you clarify for each story, what's the goal or purpose of the story? What are the business rules for the story? And for each business rule, we want our product owner to give us 1 or 2 concrete examples of how it should work. Like, you know, the user clicks this and types this in, what should happen? And that we found that, and so when we're talking about a story, if we start to get a lot of business rules, or if we're mind mapping a story where we're putting nodes and different levels, if that starts to get complicated, that story is too big. Now we want to divide it up and make it smaller. And so it's kind of a learning process, kind of iterating on it, but there are a lot of good techniques. Richard Lawrence has a really good story slicing technique. If you contact me on email or Twitter or something, I can give you more resources for that. My Twitter is here. I'll type it in the chat. I'll type my.
Thank you. There's another question there. Abraham, he's asking, what's the first step for correctly integrating testing in release governance?
I think the first step is getting those. If you're doing automated tests, making sure you get those automated test suites into your continuous integration pipeline. And as far as testing, again, I think it's good to make it visual. I like to put my testing tasks or my testing stories into, we're using Jira as our project tracking tool. So for each epic that we have, I make a Jira ticket for all the testing, and then I put exploratory testing charters as subtasks in that Jira ticket to make them visible to everybody. With different project tracking tools, I wrote a different story for each exploratory testing charter, or maybe it's just a story to write the regression tests or write the automated tests. Making that visible in your backlog and in your Kanban board or your Scrum board, whatever you're doing, because it's a whole team responsibility. So everybody on the team should be aware of that testing that needs to be done. So making it visible, I think, is really important. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
And also making an agreement, you know, when I joined I joined my first Scrum team in 2003. I'd worked on extreme programming teams, but one of the first things we did was write on our Scrum board, no story is done until it's tested. Because at stand up, often the developers would say, well, story X is done, but the testing isn't finished, so it's not done. So just changing that definition, having a definition of done is really important, and being disciplined about it.
Thank you. So we probably have room on time for one more question. Does anybody want to ask? All right, so if we have no questions, Lisa, we really appreciate your presence here. This was super insightful for us. It's really a pleasure having you. So we hope all the participants were able to enjoy you as well and as much. So if you're interested in continuing this conversation, and Lisa, this applies to you because I think you have access, you can all meet in Spatial Chat. I will leave the URL in the chat box.
Oh, great.
I will say that in Spanish. Si quieren encontrarse y continuar esta charla, pueden encontrarse en Spatial Chat, que es nuestro punto de encuentro, digamos, es el lugar donde nos podemos encontrar para seguir conversaciones. So, thank you again, Lisa. It was a pleasure, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you.